Here's where this conversation is going to get juicy. I just thought of it.
Oh, shoot.
So you brought up Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes.
No, we can't talk about season 2 and 3.
Legend of Korra.
Those I fetching loved Legend of Korra.
Season 1
I loved
good.
I loved the whole thing.
No, absolutely not.
This is going to be great.
Absolutely not.
This is going to be an episode about sequels. It's now going to be a debate about whether or not The Legend of Korra is good.
Oh, geez, and it's been so long since I've seen it, at least probably almost 10 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I can't speak to it much, but I did not enjoy it as
fantastic.
much. Yeah.
I loved every season and almost every episode. But that is a show that is quite divisive.
Yes.
Particularly the further on it went.
Right, yeah.
But I thought it was fantastic.
So what was so fantastic about it?
I watched it, I think, all the way through probably 2.5 or 3 months ago.
Oh, really?
Because we were doing a watch of
Avatar.
The Last Airbender.
Yeah, yeah.
And we watched that whole thing. And it was like, oh, here it is.
I want more.
Let's check this out. I've heard a lot of bad things about this.
So that's why you liked it, is because your expectations were low. See, I watched it when it came out, as it was airing. No, not from hearing from other people anything. It was as the day the episodes came up, I was on the Nickelodeon.com or whatever, and I was watching that show with my wife. My expectations were through the roof because Avatar was so unbelievably good. Your expectations were not, because it had been 10 years and most people have kind of given a verdict of not good to it, right?
Sure. I think that there's probably some truth in that. At the same time, I'm at a point where I don't put stock in almost anything anyone tells me anymore. Like, okay. Particularly if it's coming from just some random people online. It's one thing if, like, you were to tell me something, or if, maybe some of the guys here on Patreon who I know better who have recommended things to me before, and I'm like, yeah, this guy knows what's up. I would take those a little more seriously. But when it comes to, like, online rage, for instance, we did a whole episode not too long ago on the controversy surrounding the translation localization of Unicorn Overlord. Yeah. Since then, there's been more on Eiyuden Chronicle and other things. I was just talking with Heon a little while ago about some of the differences between the way Xenoblade Chronicles 3 reads or feels in English versus Japanese. So there's a lot of those types of controversies that I find having like a certain core complaint that I think is valid, that are just taken like way beyond the pale,
applied to too many
to
things,
a point where people are not looking at this with a neutral, level-headed mindset at all, and are really missing a lot of important nuance to that conversation.
I think I know at least part of it. People become suspicious of what are your intentions because you translated this not word for word from the Japanese to English. It sounds fine to me, but I'm suspicious of you. Why did you do that?
That's exactly it.
Now, I will say the only time you should do that is if you're putting it in King James English. That is the only time you are allowed to deviate.
So I guess that's where people lose me with that kind of people get really angry about it.
It's the hermeneutics of suspicion.
It becomes an immediate assumption about the intention behind the change or whatever that sort of spirals out of control without people actually reaching out, without actually finding out. And again, there are people still like calling us names on that video because there are, and we said it in the video, so I don't know why people, well, I do know why. Anyway, we said it in the video. Yeah. There are some anime studios like who have legitimately gone out of their way to push their own sort of like agenda in this localization that deviates so far from the original story.
I will say that's not okay. That should not be done.
Not only is that not okay, we both said in the video that's not okay, and we're against that. Yeah. So we're really on the same side. It was just a matter of, is that what's happening with this game? Right. Which, based on the evidence we have, I don't think so. And based on the evidence we have from similar projects like Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story, that was actually encouraged by the Japanese writer.
Yeah.
Please make it sound more like this in English or something, right? So I just don't like jumping on a bandwagon of hate and outrage and making assumptions first.
Right.
I like to never do that. So how does this relate to Korra? Well,
but you can't help but really make like unsubconscious assumptions about things.
No, it's impossible.
You like expecting something, you know.
Yeah, of course. It goes without saying.
Yeah.
So when it comes to when I see outrage that I deem of this type into something like Legend of Korra online, I see people boycott and
sometimes it just takes something not being quite as good as the original and people just like hate it. They pretend like it's just the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
Just because it wasn't quite as good as the first one. But if you judged it by any type of objective metric, it's like, it wasn't horrible.
No.
You know?
I guess we can maybe start this debate with an overview, and we can like move from there into the particulars.
I remember how I felt. I don't remember.
I think that's
thought.
actually okay. I think that will work in the frame of the discussion we're about to have.
Perfect.
Because I have great examples where I would more or less say exactly the same thing. I don't really remember why I don't like that thing. I just remember having strong feelings about it at the time.
Right.
And, I could say that about something like maybe Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which I haven't touched in a long time and which I played 30 hours and didn't complete.
Right.
But I wouldn't be able to point you at any particular thing now because I'm not prepared for that.
There you go.
That's
a good
okay.
Example. Yeah.
Because many, many, many times in my life, I've revisited something later and gone like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't remember this. I didn't remember this. And, I have maybe a change of perspective on that. Anyway, let's just start with a general overview.
Okay.
My feelings on Korra by the end of it were that I really, really loved it. A little bit similar, actually, to Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, where there are some people, again, who just really think Better Call Saul is like just doesn't touch. And I think in certain ways, I think the general plot of Breaking Bad is a more interesting plot, a much more fascinating character as sort of your main, POV character that you're following there. Walter White is definitely like a more complex
premise,
and the premise is a little bit more, it's got a little bit better of a hook to it, I feel. But there are certain moments, character writing, where you can, and even like the structure of how they would go about structuring and editing these episodes, where you could see the maturization process for these filmmakers, because it's made by the same guys.
Oh, right.
Both series are. And so you see a certain like technical mastery becoming stronger and stronger with the second series, even though the first series certainly had what I think are more memorable characters, a stronger plot, and that sort of thing. So I see kind of the value of both being a little bit different. And I feel similarly about Korra, where it's like there's really no beating the cast of Last Airbender.
Right.
Like
they were so good.
There's almost a lightning
Uncle
in a bottle.
Iroh and Sokka and Katara. And,
a total lightning in a bottle kind of aspect to that, where it's just like there's very little chance that you will recreate something that just like speaks to people quite the way that did with the characters themselves.
In which case, you just can't ever follow that up.
Yeah.
And to that point, I can't remember his name, Aaron Ehaz, or I can't remember the name of the creator of Avatar, but has not surpassed that show. I think he created a show called Dragon Prince, which I watched a little bit of.
Yeah. Was that in the same universe?
No, this is a
totally
Netflix thing. Totally
different
thing.
Okay.
Totally different thing. But once again, I do think it's just kind of lightning in a bottle. So it's kind of like how Peter Jackson is never going to touch Lord of the Rings. George Lucas could never touch like the original trilogy. Like you just, when your glory days are behind you and you're still trying to do cool stuff, and it's just like, it's pretty clear. That's usually when you can say, hey, there was probably some element of lightning in a bottle that happened here that's outside of the control. It's not just you, right? Like so other things happened to really make this thing coalesce into something that just you can't just recreate.
Sure. see, how old would we have been? I mean, the first time I watched it, I was at least in my 20s.
2004? When did it come out?
But we would have been in high school.
Yeah,
or
I didn't watch it originally.
High school.
I watched it in college.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it years later.
I did too.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people who grew up with the show, they were adolescents or kids.
Yeah.
When you're at that age, there's something really special about like bonding with these fictional kids that are you kind of grew up with.
Yeah.
You know, you can't really like catch that again with these people that are now getting into adulthood when you do a sequel to that. That's really, you're not going to be able to capture them with the same way with the characters, I think.
Right.
So that's where I think Last Airbender has the clear leg up on Korra.
Right. Is
the characters were a lot stronger. However, I think where Korra shines, and I think I don't know this, I haven't looked into it, but what I imagine was the thought process behind the show was, okay, these kids grew up watching these characters, they've aged, let's write something a little more complex, something a little more not so straightforward as far as plot goes, and as far as maybe like working in politics, working in like, difficult sort of like a social type issues within that same world. And that is where I thought the show really shined. I thought that it was written in a very balanced sort of way, in a way that didn't preach or in a way that didn't like try to tell you what the answer was, but that presented some issues that were complex and where it wasn't just so easy to just point at there's the bad guy and they're horrible and whatever.
Right.
I think they did a good job of trying to show that there's more nuance to life than that. And I think that's what I appreciated about the writing in Korra. Now, as far as I remember, let's see if you remember this too. Season 1 was all about that sort of like resistance group of non-benders who wanted to take bending away from everybody.
So that everyone can be the same.
Yes.
I am actually a big fan of season 1.
It's great. It's great.
It's very good. You're right. It touches on some political stuff. It touches on like class issues and all of that stuff. Season 1 I thought was quite good, but the political issue was essentially one of egalitarianism. It was forced sameness for everybody, right? And not by allowing the normies to, not by pushing the people at the bottom up, but by bringing the people at the top down.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, hey, now everyone's equal, right?
Right.
And that's a pretty, what is that? The envious attitude, it's an instinct a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Right. But anyways, I thought that was a very interesting one because that's usually people that was taking a more individualist stance over the collectivist stance, which most media tends to kind of do the opposite. So I thought that was interesting that they kind of went on.
I kind of liked that villain character too.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, I guess if you haven't watched it, you probably need to go watch it because we might get in some particulars. But what I liked about it was that he was actually a bender the whole time,
right?
And so it's like anyway. They wrote a very complex villain. I felt like, and by very complex, I mean very complex in comparison to a kid's show. It's like graduating a kid's show into like the beginnings of thinking about more difficult socio-political topics.
And his relationship with his brother was so interesting.
Really good.
And the way that season ended, just tragic, but also like very deep. I felt that. Yeah. Like season 1 really made me feel
especially the way they worked in some of the most like gut-punching kind of like powers of the original show, like let's say when what is her name, Katara learns bloodbending, and like this dude is bloodbending and stuff. Like it was just really nice lead into we're still in this world, right? Okay, we still got the really cool magic and sort of like world rules of that,
right?
But we're gonna try to dig into something a little meatier, like as in meat, meat, meatier,
nice.
Than
the summon,
than what we did in the original show.
So
we're kind of taking a step up from maybe like a kid show to a young adult type of thing. And I thought that first season was a really great way to sort of like make that transition.
Mix also mentioned something about Korra lost her powers, but then somehow she just got them back.
Are we talking about the very end of the first season?
Sorry. Yeah, he's saying season 1 is what Mix is saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as I remember,
how did she?
What happened there is her bending got stolen from a guy, but then she got visited by Aang. Who,
the Avatar state thing kind of...
Yeah.
Okay.
Because she still had her Avatar state, and he visited and restored. Because Aang had learned this ability to take...
That's right.
Bending away.
In the true way, not the blood-bending forcey way or whatnot. Yeah.
So he had learned that, and he had actually performed that as a punishment on some people. Yeah. And it was actually the father of this... The character who ended up being the villain of the first season.
And so then it's like, was that a mistake? He wasn't perfect?
Exactly. They were painting Aang as not being a perfect character, which I thought was a great thing to do.
I have some parallels right here, but I'm going to hold off on them for a minute because there was one other thing. It was the way that airbenders were reintroduced back into the world.
Yes.
Where it's like, you're an airbender now, like just some random, like you were born and you're an airbender. And it's a way of like, they kind of explained it as like, this is the way of the world of like kind of rebalancing itself, right? It just kind of bestowed powers upon, people sort of at random.
This is a different season where like it started like just awakening in random people.
Yeah. Was this a different season?
It's a different season. That's fine. That's fine. Too long. Go on. That's why I'm here to remember the details. But
okay. This is what it is though. The first season of
Korra.
Avatar is Harry Potter 1 through 4, and Legend of Korra is Harry Potter book 5 mostly, and then 6 and 7 at the end. So if I'm going to compare it to Harry Potter, which is hilarious, I remember a long time ago you told me you really liked Harry Potter book 5. It was my least favorite.
Let me clarify that. Because I haven't read that since I was 15.
Yeah, this was a long time ago.
So the reason I liked it is because Harry Potter was 15 and I was 15. And so we were... No, it's not quite that shallow. It was the same age and I understood the angst.
The challenge, yeah.
I understood the angst, which bothered most people about 5.
Right.
Harry's just pissed off all the time.
And he has no friends. He pushes everyone away. He's not nobody. And then he learns that his dad wasn't so perfect. And then maybe even, later on, maybe Dumbledore made some mistakes and things like that. That's more like the end of Harry Potter stuff. But the more I think about it and talk about this, I feel like that analogy is pretty good because Korra does exhibit some of that Harry Potter 5
energy.
Kind of vibe. And instead of having a core group that's close, the whole group just kind of breaks up in the end, and is not, which is normal. I get that's life. That's totally life. But it's a bit deflating for the viewer.
Okay, cool. So what are the things that, because we agree first season's pretty good.
First season is very good. Almost on par with the original series.
So second season, from what I remember here, is the water-bending tribe. They come visit, and it's like, these southern waterbenders are not following the teachings. This is what do you call it? Apostasy. We gotta we gotta set this straight. Right. So like, Korra's father originally came from the northern tribes and was sort of like exiled over something they talk about later in that season. But his brother became the leader of the northern tribe, which is essentially made him the leader of all the water.
Because the North tribe is the legit one. Yeah. The South tribe is kind of...
They're a small group who were devastated in the original Last Airbender show, and they're just kind of rebuilding now, right? So anyway, he wants to go basically reform them back into one united tribe again and make them follow the teachings. But what he's really after is sort of breaking down this barrier to the spirit world.
Oh, right.
And this is this is the whole part where Korra as an avatar is really good as far as bending goes, but she's very disconnected spiritually. And that's a big part of what you need to be a true avatar.
Yeah.
So she's following her uncle thinking, we're going to break this barrier to the spirit world and I'm going to be able to, go into the spirit world like I'm supposed to be able to do and be this bridge between the living world and the spirit world and things like that.
Yeah.
So that season, you're saying you weren't a fan of. I'm curious as to what about it you didn't like.
Jeez, the seasons all kind of mesh for me a little bit. Let me start with a positive here. Do the thing, Julie.
Julie, do the thing.
Is awesome, and I still say it all the time.
Yeah, that
do the
character.
Thing. Do the thing, Julie.
That character was introduced
I'm
in that
only productive
season.
for about 45 minutes a day between 2:45 and 3:30 p.m. And other than that, I'm just going to be, that was awesome. Like, that's hilarious. And I love that character. That was just absolutely magical. I don't think I can really say much about season 2 other than I didn't like it as much because they all kind of run together for me.
Yeah.
At some point, the group just stops. They just stop liking each other and they just stop talking to each other.
So is that the core of your beef with the show is the characters and their like sort of
it could
bond?
It could be because Avatar was so special with that, right?
Yeah.
The characters had this unbreakable bond, right? And then in Legend of Korra, it's like they introduce these characters, and then by the last season, it's like they kind of don't even appear in the last season. Some of them, it's like you really don't even like they aren't together in any way, and you don't even really care whatever ended up happening to them, I guess. And then by the end, she kind of does what she does, and then it's over, and I don't know, whatever happened to those guys, whatever. But I was curious. I was like, well, what's up with like all these other people?
There definitely is an element to that. Okay, so I think I see where you're coming from.
Okay.
Because in season 1...
I'm at the limit of my ability to speak about Korra, by the way. It's been too long, and I think I've presented what I remember.
I think you'll start remembering as I start getting into details,
Perfect.
which I think is why this will work.
Okay.
In season 1, you meet the two brothers that both like Korra.
Oh, yes.
Right? There's a little bit of a love triangle
The firebender and the earthbender. Yeah.
There's some struggles that go on there. Ultimately, and listen, guys, I have a mental illness with remembering names. It's just like a problem with me. For some reason, I cannot remember names no matter how many times I watch a thing. So I don't remember the names of the characters. There's the older brother Firebender and the younger brother Earthbender.
So
he's the
brother,
chubbier one. Yeah. He's the funny one. And the older brother is the serious-minded, like, I'm going to, go be a cop after this.
Right.
He has a different girlfriend in season 1 who he meets on the street when she almost runs him over. And her father...
that girl, yeah.
Her father was like the head of this company.
Defense contractor, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they find out he's actually funding the bad guy. Yeah. And so she's all torn because she loves her father, but like he's doing all this bad stuff. So she ends up joining their little posse. Right. So you got Korra and this girl who both like the firebender dude, and he's torn between, I'm already with this girl, but I kind of start liking you now.
Right.
And my brother likes you, and I like you. And so it's a mess.
Yeah.
The whole dynamic of that group is real complicated and teenage angsty.
Yes, it's quite realistic in terms of a teenage friend group that is mixed gendered is like it gets weird.
Yes.
It does get weird, especially when you're around 15. And the realism is I would not knock Korra for being more realistic. I would not do that. So
I build that as a background to say at the end of the season, he ends up choosing Korra.
Yes.
And so this other girl is like, oh crap, like he likes her. I have to deal with that. And the brother is like, my brother got the girl I liked, but he's being cool about it and trying to like
he's making jokes and
grown up about it, right?
Yeah.
And not trying to make it ruin their relationship. Season 2 begins with that relationship.
Yeah.
They are not getting along. Their relationship's not going great.
Yes.
He's not the best at understanding
Feelings.
and listening to her, which is all, all very relatable stuff.
Yes, of course.
But in the course of the season, he ends up becoming more committed to his work than to her and breaks up with her.
Right.
And then she like ends up being split apart from the group for a long time as she's like going through this journey into the spirit world and trying to make her connection to the spirits.
And mostly a lot of it, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of it is just her by herself. Is this accurate?
I
Okay.
believe this is the season where she sees the original Avatar's life.
Oh,
where she goes and it's a whole different art style. Like they changed the whole animation style. And it's like the very original Avatar. And there's several episodes where she's just watching his life story about how the first Avatar even came to be. And it was all these two spirits, this like spirit of good and spirit of bad that were like fighting, and then he came and like helped the dark spirit, and then like the light spirit had to end, got diminished because of this, and then they ended up bonding. So the light spirit bonding with him is what made him the Avatar. That's how he goes into the Avatar state at all. I loved this portion of the show the most of that season.
The balance,
this sort of historical lore exploration of how the Avatars even came to be.
I remember this.
And
I thought it was cool too.
I thought it was awesome. I thought it was great. I thought those were some of the best episodes of the whole season.
Yeah.
And I thought it was super clever that they just changed the whole animation style. Like the world was really different at the time. They all lived on those big turtles. They had cities on the turtles.
Yeah.
And they sort of like were the ones who had the powers of the elements, those 4 turtles or whatever. And the people just like lived totally separated from each other and essentially didn't go out of their little towns and cities on the backs of these turtles because it was too dangerous out there.
Right.
That's where all the spirits lived. And so it was like, oh, can the spirits and the humans live in harmony? Oh, I don't know.
Right.
And anyway, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but that was all part of season 2. Her having to deal with fighting her uncle and her father, who her uncle framed to look bad, and trying to decide, oh my goodness, like, what am I supposed to do? I felt it was really excellent. I really loved season 2 for all the reasons I'm describing. But what it sounds to me like is it was a little bit more about this core group of characters, which again, as I think is what was so special about the original show.
Right. And to my level of expectations was that something like that would continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they definitely had a more fractured core group that were quite often separated from each other or not getting along or even actively mad.
Right.
And, okay, you're over here doing your thing. We're over here doing our thing. I guess that for me, while I don't have the same attachments, I felt still the character writing was strong because each character had these really well-defined weaknesses in their character, things they needed to like improve or work on.
Yes.
And all of them
had
these great arcs of how they started to realize that overcome it, particularly Korra. I mean, right from the beginning, right? Like she's a little baby almost, and she's like, oh, firebending and all this crazy stuff.
She's doing everything but
she's
wind
brash,
bending.
and she's arrogant, not arrogant, but cocky, a little overconfident.
She doesn't want to meditate. She doesn't want to like.
She doesn't have any spiritual connection.
Yeah.
That kind of wisdom that you're supposed to have.
Right.
But even her mentor, which is Aang's son,
he's kind of faking it a little.
Stuck up, too rigid, too strict.
Right.
Not loose enough, not fun enough. And so like they're good foils. And even in their mentor apprentice relationship, there was a lot of tension and separate for a while. And, and in season 2, he wants to teach her how to become more connected spiritually.
Right.
And she's like, well, my uncle is better at this than you, because there's that whole scene where they get attacked by the dark spirit in the southern tribe, right? And it's like, I forget his name, Aang's son, her mentor. Again, I have a problem with this. I cannot remember names.
Can't remember.
He can't defeat this thing. He can't get it. He can't defend the village from it, but her uncle is able to. So her uncle seems really advanced as far as his ability to communicate and control spirits goes. And so she decides to let him be the mentor instead. And that was a mistake, because he's actually looking to release the dark spirit that was the original Avatar had confined and whatnot. So plot-wise, I thought it was cool. I really loved learning more about the original Avatar. And I thought the character writing, while, again, they're all kind of split up and mad at each other, is still really strong individually. They each have an arc. You can see what they need to work on as characters, where their arc is leading them, and it leads to satisfying conclusions. They all become a bit wiser by the end, and they all kind of make up. It's like, okay, we weren't good together as a couple. That's all right. Let's still be pals, kind of a thing.
His name is Tenzin, by the way.
Tenzin, thank you.
Thank you, Mix.
Yes, that's correct.
And Mako and Bolin.
So,
that's right.
Does any of that strike any memories as to
It does. It does. But my bigger complaints would be towards the end. I actually do remember seasons 3 and 4. The way their ratings were not as good.
That's
I do
true,
remember this
because it ended up getting off Nickelodeon and being streamed.
They ended up just releasing the end of the show, and I can't remember how much, if it was all of season 4 or if it was just the last few episodes. They ended up just releasing them online, and the show was basically just canceled. It was not commercially
TV,
successful, at least not towards the end. And probably season 1 probably was. But as people kind of got
off
where the show was going, you're talking about a lot about the characters' arcs, and from my memory, they kind of just they wrote these characters with these questions and these arcs, and in the end of the show, they don't really. They kind of. It's almost like they just kind of gave up on like letting you know exactly what happens or how these characters kind of got resolved or how their arcs or their situations got resolved. I feel like they just kind of. I feel like they just kind of gave up. Like at the end of the show.
So you feel like there was a sort of setup or a promise about like, here's
Based
where
on
these characters
season 1,
are going.
Yeah.
And then it's like by the end, it feels like we didn't actually get a resolution to those particular.
No. I think that's more or less accurate. Yeah.
Okay. So
my
that
my
was
10-year-old memory serves me to say that sure.
That's kind of the crux at what you didn't. What didn't work for you in the show.
Writing slowly, in my opinion, got worse over time, and then by the end, it was like, yeah, well, and I can't remember which characters this is true for, but yeah, well, let's just forget that whole plot line. We're doing something else now.
Okay.
And that's more or less what. So
let's move into season 3, because I loved that one too.
Really? Season 3 just murdered me.
Season 3 is the one where a lot of airbenders started to sort of reawaken. Right? It was like, oh, the Air Nation, we want to rebuild the Air Nation again. All these random people as a way of, like you said, the Earth is sort of rebalancing the elements because the elements need to be in balance. That's kind of a whole thing.
Right.
The
and
way
apparently
this
the
world works.
Earth can just do that itself?
Yeah. So like...
what did we need what's up with the human intervention? The Earth can balance itself.
I have a feeling, and this is, again, based on my even having watched it more recently, a bit foggy memory. I have a feeling that season 2's lore introductions as to the way the world works set up why this is the case.
Okay.
Because
the
spirits were allowed to come back and live in amongst humans again. So the first Avatar had sealed the spirits away in a different realm from the human world. Yeah. And it was blocked off.
And it was spirits were seen as a bad thing.
Yes.
And it was basically that was a mistake.
Not a bad thing because he was friends with all the spirits. Spirits really loved first Avatar. It was okay. There is no way to make this work.
Yes,
we
can't
separate. Coexist.
Yes. That's How to Train Your Dragon 3, by the way.
In large part
ruining all these things for people.
In large part
I don't love that. Yeah. But,
because the original Avatar saw that human beings not that the spirits were wrong, but the human beings are not going to treat them right. For their protection and for a way to end this like suffering that we're causing each other in war that's happening, we need to separate.
It's How to Train Your Dragon 3, and it's humans are the problem, right? Maybe that's one of the other things that rubs me wrong a little
But here's the thing. Korra decides that's wrong.
Right. Well,
Korra says
she decides that we can live together.
She says that the first Avatar's conclusion that we must live separate is wrong.
Okay.
Well, that we can, even though it's going to be hard, we can coexist. We need to find a way to make it work. And a large part of the response to that, because I feel like this is a nuanced take on that. It's not just like, Korra was right, original Avatar was wrong. I feel like the way it's written is Korra's sentiment, I feel like, is one the general audience will say, yeah, we need to learn to coexist.
It's the assumption that we've based our current society on. So
Yes.
we would love it if that was true.
But what they show in season 3 is
Yeah.
that's not going well. And everyone
Right.
hates her for having done this.
Yes, I remember this.
The guy who's like the mayor or whatever of the city, that it's like a city state that Aang had set up. Right. It's not part of any one of the nations necessarily.
Yeah, it's Washington,
the Republic,
D.C. Yeah.
whatever it is. He's like pissed.
Where
and,
Toph is like the chief of police.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he and Korra like basically have a total falling out over this, and like, we don't want your influence in the Republic anymore.
Right.
Go away.
Well, it's the growing pains of like all of a sudden now the world has changed and people aren't ready for that, right?
And so I think, anyways, this is a really long-winded way of getting around to saying.
I'm remembering things now. Weren't like the trees and the plants were
they're
getting
all
infected.
growing
I'm remembering
inside of
this
the
now.
city and like
So
breaking apart.
It was a problem
architecture.
anyways. Like
Yes.
the barrier was not strong enough anyways. Like something was going to have to give either way, right? And she was saying, well, let's just.
Yeah. Anyway.
Gosh, I can't remember this.
But
yeah, okay.
But what I like about it, and anyway, long-winded way of getting around to, I think the reason why this awakening of airbending and stuff was happening in people was due to this
spirits
reintegration of the spirits with the normal world again. So it wasn't like an unexplained, oh, now people just get these powers.
It wasn't explained, but it was random, and it was people who couldn't already bend, I suppose. Because otherwise, they'd be a fire plus
I think
air.
it was because a lot of people
and it was random
had grown up as
of.
non-benders, or actually there were
And
some
all of a
people
sudden
in
they
like
can
their
airbend.
Earth Nation and things like that who are just also, I can airbend now. What the fetch? And
Yeah.
so Tenzin and Korra are like, okay, let's go gather up these people and like invite them to come start the Air Nation again. This is gonna be great. And then of course, they have their own lives. They're not gonna be like, yeah, I'm gonna like abandon my wife and kids to like come live in some Air Nation and become a monk. Like, you crazy? I'm not doing that.
More or less what I was thinking. Yeah.
And so there's like a real struggle to even like sell the concept to these people. I remember there's one character who's like he lives in his mom's basement kind of a thing.
Yes,
he's like
I
a
remember
deadbeat
this.
kid, and she's like, go to be in the Air Nation. He's like, I don't want to, right? So they're encountering all these, and then one, kid who shows some promise, he ends up being kind of a thief. So they get like one person to like agree to come with them, and he ends up like screwing them over. So it's like a real struggle to even like get people to agree. But the main villain of that season is a guy who had been like locked away for a long time. But it was almost like a reversal of what the first season's bad guy wanted. Because he was like, let's make people equal by taking away everyone's bending
forcibly
all together. Mm-hmm. And this guy was more like the avatar and like the system we have in place needs to be. They were more like, I guess, anarchist would probably be the way to.
So just hyper individualist. Yeah.
So he was a very almost the opposite type of villain, but I thought he was very compellingly written as well. Again, not painted out as someone whose intentions are evil, but someone who justifies the means. And that's where the problem comes in. It's the extremist sort of like any way of getting here is justified kind of a thing.
He had a really dope, deep, awesome philosophy, is my guess. He was very, very, he thought a lot of thoughts while he was in prison.
Yes.
And he figured out the world. Right?
Yeah. And I think what I liked the most about this was that like Korra was just not strong enough to take this dude on. He was just a fetching beast. But it became, with the help of the others around her, all of them together were able to sort of like finally subdue him.
And who were the others for this one?
So Tenzin and
them. Okay.
Bolin, and they got not Toph, but Toph's daughters. I think that actually comes into the final season, actually, now that I think about it. That's true. Okay. We'll get there in a second. Anyway, he ends up somehow like traumatizing her so bad.
Oh, yeah.
And like breaking her psychologically.
Yeah.
That like she's not able to really bend very well at all anymore.
Right. I do remember this.
So in season 4, she's like super
like
weak.
Heavy depressed. Yeah. She's just
and the whole thing in season 4 is like coming to terms with that trauma where she has to physically go back and face this dude in prison again.
Right.
And he like
exposure therapy.
He like gives her the advice and like stuff
Yeah.
that she needs to like overcome this trauma that's blocking her bending, which is so cool. I
very
felt like it was
interesting.
like, yeah, this dude was horrible, right? He was like a terrible, terrible, awful villain who's like now bestowing the wisdom necessary to her to like help her get over the trauma he inflicted on her. He's like that kind of dude. And I was just like, I've never seen anything like this.
He just can't stand to see a weak person.
Yeah, he was like,
That's interesting.
there's just more to a person than just he wanted to like take over the world. Like he really believed he's doing the right thing.
That's interesting.
And he's
That's
actually like in certain ways a good guy, has a good heart somewhere in there, and didn't want to hurt her this way, and like tries to help her out. And I just thought that was like really cool. So like
That's fascinating.
But that's into season 4. And then season 4 I thought was the weakest one.
Me too.
That was the one where we do like a time skip a little bit.
At the very least, could you say that the seasons that one is the
Declined?
strongest and that each one is weaker, despite
don't know.
liking them more? But
I don't
is there
know.
a decline?
I would say
felt that
I
for
would
sure.
say that in certain ways I felt like seasons 1 through 3 were all pretty strong, and that
Okay.
season 4, while it wasn't as strong, was still pretty good, because I feel like season 4's premise is they're trying to rebuild the Earth nation, trying to reunite it again. It had kind of been split into like different sort of
Okay.
tribes or states.
Yeah.
It wasn't united anymore. And that was all because the queen was like super corrupt. Probably season 3, actually. Yes. And she was killed. And
Oh,
so it's
wow.
like her son or nephew or something like that, who's this like sleazy, like stupid kid, is supposed to be the one who gets coronated. And he's like clearly not fit to lead at all.
Right.
And so there's this general who had been doing the work of going around and like reuniting the states of the Earth Nation. She says, no, I'm going to be the freaking like leader of the Earth Nation. She's going to basically build an empire, and like goes against what the Republic is. Like there's no negotiating. She has essentially forced unification, and they show that. And Bolin, the little brother of the firebending kid, he was like going with her and doing this, and he had this idea of her that's, oh, she's great. No, she's doing all this great work.
That's right.
And like,
he was making propaganda movies for her, right? I remember that. That was pretty funny. Yeah, with the bear.
Because he had been
big
doing the
bear.
propaganda films in the second season too,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
what's his name from the South,
Do the thing, Julie.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
he
that
started
guy's great.
because he had his film production company
Yeah.
and whatever. Anyway, he is like going around with her. And like, oh, we're unifying the Earth Nation. This is all great. And everyone else is like, dude, she's like a freaking authoritarian, crazy person. Like don't you see how like messed up this is? And so there's again another divide of the core group that I think you're
Right.
talking about.
Yeah.
Which is almost every season has that in common. It's like they had this core group of people that like almost never seem to agree throughout the rest of the show, and they're kind of split from
And
each other.
in the end, they all really just decide to just go different ways.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the final episode. Anyways, I'll get back to that in a second. But what I liked about it was, again, this goes a little bit into what we talked about with our Dune podcast episodes, which are not live publicly at this time.
Right.
But we talked about it in Planescape a little bit too. You know, you are so committed to a cause that you really believe in. There's a lot of strong belief about it.
Yeah.
And these people's belief are being manipulated by someone who's a charismatic leader,
Right.
who
yeah.
understands the power that belief has.
Right.
And that's exactly what
yeah.
this woman is doing. And you see that happening in Bolin. And he has to come to grips with, oh my gosh, I helped facilitate this thing.
Right.
That's such like a heart-wrenching, gut-punching moment for those who have had that type of experience.
Right.
You know, I thought I was involved in something good, and it turns out it was this. Like, what do I do with that? Like, how do I do with the guilt of feeling like I contributed to this when I thought it was this? How do I reconcile that? How can I help the people that I hurt? Like, his girlfriend
Oh, he had a girlfriend?
was... So Toph's two daughters, who are the earth metal bending people,
Yeah.
one's the leader of the police in the Republic, the other just a wealthy family that lives in the Earth Kingdom. They have some influence there. And one of her daughters, so this would be Toph's granddaughter, is girlfriend to Bolin.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And she's pissed because her family is essentially running the state that had been sort of split in the Earth Kingdom.
Right.
And now they're being force unified by this general who had been an apprentice to Toph's daughter who was running the state here.
Okay.
And so her daughter, who's Bolin's girlfriend, is like, what are you doing? You're helping him, like helping her hurt my family and like go against their will unification. It's a whole thing. This is what I'm talking about. It's much more complex than Last Airbender is.
Yeah. Oh, Last Airbender is plenty complex, though.
It is.
I'm not saying defend,
it's not.
especially towards the end of that show.
There's no need to defend it.
Yeah.
It's a very, very amazing show.
Right.
It's probably the better of the two. It would be my conclusion.
Me too.
I'm just saying that what I enjoyed about Korra was it tried to really make these situations complex.
Yeah.
You can't just like so easily point. And I love that they put a character you really loved like Bolin.
Yeah.
Like a character who you saw was very good, a good-hearted guy. He's on the wrong side of this. And the immediate instinct of, I would say, a lot of people in today's political discourse is to point at someone on the wrong side and be like, and condemn them.
Right.
And it's harder to do that when it's Bolin who you like. He's the funny guy.
Right.
That makes it tough. That makes the whole situation tough to grapple with.
Right.
It's not so easy to just point out, you're wrong and you're right. The whole show does that, I think, really, really well. That's probably what it does best of anything, is presenting complex conflicts that are not easy for you to condemn people.
Right.
Because you can see where they're coming from. And eventually you have to go, well, it's always the extremists here who are justifying any means to get what they want.
Right.
That's where it becomes evil, right? Which is something I just happen to agree with. But like I said, the villains are complex. There's two sides to them. Our characters are on the right and wrong side of issues throughout. Our characters have character flaws and weaknesses that they really need to be introspective about and like really think about and change about themselves. And so even Aang, even this character who we remember is like the Avatar from the original show. Right. We all love Aang. He's that lovable kid. Even he had moments when he had to start actually, ruling and taking some action on some things where it's just not, you're in that position. It's not easy.
Oh,
you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
No matter who you are, even if you're Aang, you're going to make mistakes. And I think that it painted that in a really nuanced way without being preachy, without trying to, push some kind of agenda. And even though, I guess I'll just put it that way. It never seemed to me, and I think that that's what I felt a lot of people complained about, was that there was some sort of agenda behind the message of Korra. It was trying to like push this kind of politics onto its audience.
Right.
And I watched that and felt it was the opposite. I felt like it was going out of its way not to pick a side and to let you grapple with, well, what really is right or wrong about this? Because it doesn't condemn any of its villains, really. It leaves it. I think its intention is to always leave you with the villains feeling like, well, I feel bad for them, actually.
So everything you like about it is what I didn't like about it.
I guess so.
And I don't know how to say it. Well, I'm a fan of simplicity. Okay, you go first.
Well, I was going to say, because you just said that, maybe it's an issue of I like that kind of thing. I like this sort of like, I don't want to say moral ambiguity, because it's not quite that, but more like painting people as complex beings that are not perfect and that make mistakes. But we can't just condemn them wholesale either.
You know what's hilarious? Because I'm going to keep this Harry Potter analogy going. in books 5 and 6 and 7 do that same thing. They're like, hey, people aren't so perfect. But then at the very end of book 7, Professor McGonagall is like, all right, everyone in Slytherin dorms, go to the dungeons. All of you go to the dungeons. Everyone make sure they're there.
True.
They're the bad guys. Slytherin house to the dungeons. Okay, the other 3 houses, let's get ready and defend Hogwarts. And it's like, but there's something, there's something interesting about that I think is, I know you don't like it, but there's something about that that's almost like you especially these kinds of stories, you do have to, there has to be a bad guy. And like, because
the bad guy's Voldemort.
Yes, the bad guy's Voldemort.
Not every person who's ever been sorted in the Slytherin house.
And then you've got to go back and because then at the very end, Harry Potter's son asks him like, "Hey, what if I go to Slytherin? Oh no!" And Harry Potter's like, "It's okay. There's good people in Slytherin." But then Professor McGonagall just threw them all in jail.
Yeah. In fact, I've never thought about it that way before.
Yeah,
you just brought that up, and I just went, "Oh, Fetch, you're right." Like. I think what's so weird about that too is that's I don't even think you're meant to think about it that
you're
much.
Not.
It's just supposed to be a funny joke in the moment. It's just played off as it's just funny.
They're the bad guys,
but
and
it really is
cheers, down with
it's kind
Slytherin.
of a problematic what would you call that? Implication.
Yes.
That every single these are children too. We're talking about kids that are as young as 11 years old. You guys are fetching evil. You don't get to participate.
It's almost like they can't take the risk.
That's fetching messed up.
It's kind of messed up. But I have actually I have, how would I put this? When I first noticed that and was like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on here?" I kind of reversed my course a little bit, right? I read these stories to my children now. I've read the first several Harry Potter books. And I know exactly why that was done. Especially after reading these to young children. I know exactly why that was done. When things get serious, your ability to take risks goes down, right? And you have to. You can be as morally ambiguous as you want. But when Voldemort is at the gate of your castle, you have to make a decision. And you're right. You may be condemned for that decision later. Maybe it wasn't the right one or not. But I really appreciate people with strong convictions that are right convictions. Not wrong convictions. In case anybody's thinking about that. If your convictions are right, then you should stand fast and hold strong to them. I do believe that. At the same time, so this introspection, it's almost like the difference between, like in an RPG, like let's say Final Fantasy 12, most of the RPG battle stuff is done before the battle. You get ready, you allocate all of your stuff, and you strategically plan before the battle happens. Once you're in the battle, like things go however they go, right? But the preparation happens beforehand, right?
Yeah.
I think true with like philosophy and all the moral ambiguity, that's great in times of peace. It's great when before, like you equip yourself with all of this, right? But when the deck is down, you either have to pick a side or you have to forge your own way. But you don't get to just be hands off.
No.
At that point, right? You could. I mean, it may not work out well for you. That is an option, right? A lot of people would probably prefer that option because somebody else, who's in charge here? Somebody else do it, you know? But I do appreciate that. And maybe this is something that season 4, to bring it back to Legend of Korra, I felt like, I don't know, I felt like it got us into this gray area and then it just let the grayness dissolve. And then it just was like, hey, we're done. And Nickelodeon stopped giving us money, so the show's over. I'm like, oh, okay. And I love the gray area, but I appreciate it when it can reform into something solid, because the archetypes are to be found in the solid, not in the dispersed matter, if that makes sense. And the archetypes, it's true, you can be overly simplistic about it. But having watched Avatar again recently, in Swedish, of course.
Yeah.
It is a complex show. And at the very end, especially with the Fire Lord and with Aang and with season 3, like it does deal with some I think plenty complex issues that Korra kind of taking that further and introducing more and more and more of that, and then kind of just letting it be fizzly and not really telling you how any of this really goes, and whether or not anything solid can be built from it. I don't know. It was maybe difficult for me to be like, hey, that was good art. In my opinion, art serves a purpose, and I don't think the purpose should be just the morally gray area. I think you do at some point, like being open-minded is great to the end that you can find things solid for the mind to then grasp onto, if that makes sense.
Okay, let me start here. So, first of all, I want to reiterate that I agree that The Last Airbender is not some sort of like overly simplistic show. I mean, I agree with the fact, particularly with what's his name, the fire kid with the burned eye.
Oh, Zuko.
Zuko's arc is incredible in that.
It's
show.
very interesting. It's very good. Yeah,
like
my kids.
There's a real like up and down with that because you get to the point where he and he's like finally sort of like starting to become a more open kid with his emotions, and he starts the tea house with his uncle.
Yes,
and it's like it's going the right way, and then he betrays his uncle because his need to be approved by his father is just too strong.
And then the Katara one with the cave where she heals his scar.
It's so hard,
and then he can't overcome.
It's like you see a redemption starting to happen, and then he goes like so much further down than he ever was. And then has to go the redemption arc again. I thought that's fantastic. So I'm by no means trying to imply with anything I've said here that The Last Airbender is like some kiddie, super simplistic show. I think part of the reason, on top of its strong cast and lovable characters, while I think that might be the most strong element of the show, certainly, because it even goes into the previous Avatar, the Firebender Avatar, and like some mistakes that he made, and Aang's trying to like come to terms with, well, maybe the Avatar was wrong before me. That's not how this should be. So that's
that
there.
happens as well.
That's definitely there. It's definitely there.
It's just explored in greater depth in Korra.
Yes.
But in doing so, you know, a lot of people's critiques of like Star Wars Episode 8, to once again spoil another thing for everybody who hasn't seen it, was that you had this image of Luke Skywalker at the end of Return of the Jedi. And Star Wars Episode 8 just takes your impression of Luke and just like dips it into the mud for a few seconds and then hands it back to you and says, here you go.
And
in some ways, Korra does that with Aang and with everybody. And
I would agree that it was
mishandled.
I understood the intention and I felt it was mishandled in Star Wars. Right. I thought it was handled very gracefully.
Because you understood it a little bit better for Korra. And I'm not saying that was bad or anything.
Yeah.
But be careful playing with Aang, man. Like, Aang's my boy. And if
that's definitely a risk you run.
Yeah.
Taking an established, beloved character and trying to like paint some extra elements or aspects to that character that might not be as flattering as the memory serves for the audience.
And then you could say, well, it's the right thing to do because this is Aang. Like, Aang wasn't perfect, even in the show. Obviously, he did all sorts of things wrong. Yeah. Often, like his personality was one of his biggest flaws. Yeah. He just wants to have fun all the time, and it's like not the time for that. And he keeps trying to do it, and it's not. And finally, he's depressed because he can't have fun anymore. But he's got to do the serious thing, and he's like obviously this is a kid who's going to make a lot of mistakes in his future, right?
Yeah.
But for them to take Legend of Korra and start saying, well, maybe the original Avatar did things that shouldn't have been done, or maybe these people did things, or basically everybody is like this. And also Aang and all the people that you liked before. And then it's, I don't know. I just wish there was some, I don't even know what I'm trying to say here.
I think I do. And I want to start with where I agree first before I go into where I disagree.
Okay.
I agree that the ending of the Korra show, like the last episode, did feel like a fizzle out.
Absolutely.
It felt like, it ended? I don't feel like that it should be over
It's
yet.
like they didn't know how to end it. But I was feeling it for many episodes leading up to that.
See, I really only for sure felt that way in that, not even in the final episode, but just in the closing minutes of the final episode. I was like, wait, that's over? It's over now? It's over?
Really?
Really? I felt like they hadn't quite yet, like you're saying, sort of like solidified everything and brought it back together.
They dissolved what you loved and they left it dissolved in the petri dish.
I agree
of their experiment.
with that general sentiment about its ending. And I do think that was the weakest aspect of the show. So I am on board with you about that, and I think that was ultimately what left me at the end of that going, yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in the show, but I don't think that this, is as good as the original. But there was so much about it that I enjoyed so thoroughly that it was like these aspects, as far as writing goes, I think are way stronger than the original show. So I have to give it props for that. But yeah, it sort of it didn't. The landing was not smooth.
Right.
In fact, you might even say you lost some wheels on the landing or something.
Skid it off the runway a little bit.
There's a little bit of fire, and let's hurry up and get off the plane here.
Well,
nobody died.
That's more or less what happened. Yeah, nobody died.
Nobody died. It wasn't like a tragedy.
But they had to blow up like slide that everyone has to slide off.
It's just like, let's make sure everyone gets away safely.
Right.
Everyone's safe. Okay, we made it.
That's pretty good.
You got to your destination and you're alive. But it wasn't a smooth landing.
Yeah.
The rest of that flight, I feel like, was quite enjoyable.
Okay. Fair enough.
Would be my metaphor for how I felt about the show. However, I wanted to touch back on the gray areas and it seemed, well, let me ask you a question first, I guess. You said you need to have a bad guy. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
As soon as I said it, I'm like...
well, I just want you to elaborate on what you mean by that before I try to address it.
Maybe what I'm really saying is that, well, I guess to put it down to its most basic sentence structure, the most basic way I can put it is that you need conflict.
Yes.
You need something to work against,
yes.
right? You need something, there needs to be an antagonist as well as the protagonist, right?
Yes.
And they're also, and I've come around on this, I'm very different now from how I used to be, but I used to really think that movies shouldn't ever, preach, ever.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's all that movies are good for, especially documentaries. That's basically it's almost like the purpose for art is the reason for the art. And I say this as somebody who basically disagrees with all of Hollywood's messaging that they put into movies. But that is what art is. Art is, what are you trying to say? You're trying to convey a message. What are you trying to say? And if that message is, hey, open your mind more and then just leave it open, that's okay. That's okay. I'm not saying that's what Korra is necessarily saying. If that is somebody's intention, as long as there's other art those people are consuming that say, hey, close it on this thing, close it on this thing, close it on this thing, open up the mind. There's all the possibilities, but this is how everything works. It's almost like night and day. It's almost how we see things. There's you open up to the myriad possibilities, and then you focus in on one thing. You have to do something, right? So you have to pick something to do. And at the end of the day, that's ultimately what the movie is telling you, that there's a force behind it. There's a message behind it, that's saying this is like the meaning of life, something like that. And I know when you're dealing with content for kids, it gets difficult, but I find it in the old fairy tales, in abundance. I think it's beautifully put in those old stories.
I just read from the Brothers Grimm the story about the cat and the mouse. And the cat keeps eating the fat that they're supposed to save for the wintertime.
Oh, that's right.
And
yes,
and the mouse is, she continues to make excuses, and then they go in the winter and try to get and it's like, oh, you ate all the fat. What'd you do? He's like, yo, shut up, I'll eat you. And the cat eats the mouse. And the last sentence of it is, and that's the way of the world.
Yes, exactly. Because the whole point was, what is a mouse doing living with a cat? I remember reading this to my kids, and my kids were like, what was that story about? Yeah. I'm like, listen, there are certain things that is like, oh no, the moral, because a lot of these Grimm's fairy tales are a little bit preachy and you should do this, don't do this, right? Yeah. At the very end of this one, it's just like, look, if you're a mouse, don't live with a cat. That's the moral of that story. And at some point, it's on you for choosing to live with a cat. This was never going to work out for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, I think I see where you're coming from.
Okay.
I'm actually really, really enjoying this. Because
I wish I remembered the show better. I don't even think you
need to, because I think you're hitting at some things that are making sense to me. Because these are not, when I would watch people complain about Korra online, it's not about that. It's never as actually interesting to debate as that. It's like, oh, she ended up being bisexual, and that's an agenda pushing thing.
Right.
Dude, it's like, come on, stop. But I think what we're hitting on here is something that really does hit home for me, or something that I feel like I have a little bit of. Well, I wanted to call it a character flaw, but it's also a character strength. It's kind of both.
Yes,
And that's the nuance that I think the show really hits on. Is your greatest strength can also be your greatest flaw. Like this
that's
whole
a big
idea
theme
between
of the show.
the same
true.
thing in
Roomy.
different degrees that we've been talking about recently. Okay, so what I'm saying is you're hitting on being too open and not sort of landing on convictions is in itself a problem that leads to inaction, which is bad because then you allow, well, a lot of bad actors to gain ground and gain influence where they otherwise wouldn't had you had the convictions to stand up to that earlier.
Yeah.
This is something I agree with 100% and even recognize as being a bit of a fault in myself. I tend to try to not make assumptions about people,
right.
to make sure that I'm not condemning somebody without understanding the full context, and by the time I've been able to actually do all of the research and looking into something to finally land on, okay, I think I get this. Maybe that's too late. Maybe that person has already gone on to hurt some other people.
Right.
Some tragic things have happened that might not have had I had the conviction earlier and not been so obsessed with, well, I can't condemn him yet. I don't know. I don't have all the evidence.
Right.
And I think there's maybe
you'll never have all the evidence.
That's, I think, the greatest frustration that I've seen other people have with me in certain debates online or in my family or whatever. Come on, man. Like, this is wrong, they're telling me. And I'm like, well, I don't know that for sure. Let me look a little harder first. Yeah. That's the easiest way to boil that down, maybe oversimplify it. But hopefully that gets the point across. At the same time, I really feel like some of the biggest issues I see are people jumping to conclusions, assuming too much, and hurting people who were not at fault and who should not be blamed.
Right.
I see that happening way more often than the other way around. Sure. And that's probably bias working on my part. But for that reason, I guess I resonate with a lot of what Korra is trying to say. To me, I think it is trying to say something. Yeah. And that is, you can really easily make assumptions in either direction. She makes assumptions about her uncle because he's family and he's really the bad guy. Right. And it's like, that was a mistake to make those assumptions. You made assumptions about this guy, and so you went about it this way, trying to address it, and you realized those were the wrong way to go about it.
But you can't not make assumptions. I've brought this up many times. As soon as you see someone, your brain, you may not do it consciously, I guess, but your brain has assumed not just one thing, 1,000 things about that person. In the first split second, you've just looked at them, you know?
Yes.
I don't know. You have to make assumptions. You just need to make right assumptions.
Yes, but that's the whole point.
I know. That's the trick, right?
I would say people, particularly people who feel already so strongly convicted on things, they are making the wrong assumptions more often than the right ones because they are basing everything on the assumptions they've made rather than on being open to the fact that I might be wrong about some things.
Yeah, and then that's true. And then the opposite is that the people who don't have the assumptions don't have the convictions to
act quickly
to do
enough, or at sometimes be so inactive that they're useless.
Right, because you'll never have all the evidence. At some point, you just have to say, "I'm going to assume that I have enough evidence to make make a decision." Right,
I agree.
And everyone's got that bar at a different place.
Yes, yeah. I agree with that. You're never going to know it all. And I've, in very, very painful ways, had to come to that realization in my life. Yeah. You're not ever going to know the whole thing. Right. So what choice are you going to make?
At some point, you're going to have to act on a conviction. Yeah. That's what it's going to be.
So I have done that, but it's just been a lot slower than maybe some other people because I just wanted to make as certain as I could that I wasn't going to make a decision that was going to, cause more harm than good.
And that's not a bad thing at all.
And I don't think it is. And I think that
unless the cards are down and it's,
what Korra is saying is not that you shouldn't be convicted. And I, again, agree that it fizzles out at the end and it doesn't feel super resolved. Right. But I don't think it is a fence-sitting type message either.
Okay.
Where it's not convicted about stuff.
That's fine.
It's I think what the message of Korra is that it's not as simple as you think.
Right.
And it does cast its villains as villains, but those villains are always super radicalized. Even if the core of their ideology is something that you could look at and go, there's some good points there. I think ideologically, you're probably right about a lot of things, but you've decided that reaching that ideal when you want it done justifies all this other stuff to get there.
Right.
And I think that's what the show is saying is evil. It's not condemning the person or their ideals. It's condemning the actions they take, being so convinced that they are willing to hurt whoever they need to hurt for the ideal. That's the common thread between every villain of the show. Every villain, they let you go, oh, that's a sad backstory.
Right.
Oh,
yes.
They actually have some good ideas, and they poke holes in the problems of our government.
Sure, yeah. Oh, but of our heroes, of our characters.
And everything they're saying is right.
Yeah.
But that does not justify all the harm they cause to bring about their ideal against the will of the majority of people out there.
Yeah.
That is what Korra, I think, is saying. Cool. And I think that's a strong conviction, personally. I don't think that's so open that it's kind of not landing somewhere. It's still condemning the actions of these villains.
Is it?
Very much so.
The show it's saying the villains shouldn't have done that. I have to think about that, where it's saying don't be so quick to judge, but how quick can I be to judge, I suppose.
Yes.
I understand that. I agree with the message in general, and I even agree with your characterization of the way that the themes of the show. I think it makes perfect sense. I'm trying to offer an antagonist to your opinion perspective that is the reason why I didn't like the show without actually being able to remember that much about the show. Unfortunately, this topic was not planned, people.
No, and we kind of just landed on it. So and this is the last thing I want to happen, which is something I hate about the internet in general. Is people now coming in and starting to jump on.
You're going to get hate for your opinion for sure.
I'm actually more concerned about you.
I know, actually.
To be honest.
I'm aware of this. I will for sure get hate. Yeah.
There's just no need for that. This is. I hope this has been a good demonstration of how to have a healthy discussion and debate about a disagreement.
I have an idea. The
way you should talk about things instead of all the freaking mudslinging and poisoning of wells and
the people who are upset at me and who comment negatively on me. I say, good, you have shown strong convictions in condemning me. Good work. Yes, strike me down with your hate.
Yeah,
become one of me.
But I want to follow all that up by saying that what you're saying I think is valid. This is why I love having conversations like this, because while I might not come away having reversed my opinion on the show or anything like that, that's not the point of the discussion.
Right.
The point is to go, oh yeah, okay. Maybe I'm not as convicted as I should be.
Well, that's hilarious because I actually kind of want to watch Korra now. After I was never going to watch that show again. Now that I've heard you talk about it the way that you have, and I remember you're bringing to mind a lot of these scenes that I remember now. I'm thinking, wow, I might actually want to watch that show again.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if you wanted to do it, and we could chat or whatever, and see if maybe you have some different feelings about it. But
it's been a while.
But what I'm saying is that I think some of your maybe core criticisms or complaints about the show, I think when I say valid, I mean I don't think you're going to watch it and come away being like, oh, I was wrong about that. The show actually is one that has strong convictions.
Yeah.
Those are still there. And so you're probably going to have similar
here's the
feelings
trouble.
about
This is
that.
maybe what I don't like about the theme. If the theme of the show is that the conviction, the show has strong convictions because it's telling you not to be so strong about your convictions.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay,
I just don't know what to make of that.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Right? And I know I'm putting words in your mouth.
No, you're not putting my words in my mouth at
way.
all. You're not.
Okay.
I actually don't feel that way.
But I just wonder if that's really a strong conviction. Really? Like it is, but like really?
I think it is in the sense that what it's saying is you can be strongly convicted about things.
Just don't kill people. Well,
without
but not
taking
even.
But there is a certain line. There is a certain extreme that is too far. And I mean, I'm sure you would agree with me on that.
I 100% agree with you.
So I think what it's exploring is that boundary.
Right.
And I don't think what it's trying to say is that there isn't a boundary.
You know what's funny? I should look up other people's critiques of Korra because it's probably not this.
I don't. Well, I didn't look that hard into it, but I just did a little bit of reaching.
Yeah.
It seemed more or less that there was a lot of...
It's just the show gets weak, but it just gets weak towards the end and is very disappointing. That's mostly my critique. And then the conviction stuff is just like me, like, sad about our current state of society where people don't have convictions anymore. Because we've been taught not to by media like this.
That's the thing, is that I don't feel that way about society. Really? I feel like society is more convicted than ever and more divided and more radicalized than ever. I feel like they are more sure than ever that they're right on their respective sides.
They are, but they don't do anything about it.
Yeah, it's a lot of keyboard
like if we think
warrior.
of 1776 or if we think of the Civil War, or I don't know, you can go back in history and be like, those guys have some freaking strong convictions, right? And then you look now and it's like, well, at least we're avoiding war, which is kind of cool. Although I don't know how much longer because things are getting weird now.
Yeah, there's a boiling point.
Yeah, things are going to get crazy in the world. But like, I don't know that, first off, I don't know that America has the convictions to fight for its own existence.
So if we're talking about,
you know what I'm saying?
The government...
the citizens.
Like if we're talking about the government as a body not being convicted, I would say yes. Right. Like I don't know if our governments these days stand on much at all, other than
100%
corruption and making money for the elite. And there's just a lot of But I don't know if that hasn't always been the case, really. Unless we're talking about, like you're saying, like the moments of revolution where like a new government's installed and we're going to base it on this set of values.
Right.
But that doesn't remain no matter what empire we're talking about. I think
you're right. It always goes away.
What I'm talking about is I'm seeing how convicted people are in their ideologies to the point of being so unmoving that it's like impossible to have a conversation with anyone.
Like online, it's true. Yeah, it's true.
I mean, I would say even in real life, I've seen examples of families being, unable to really like, if they can stand to be in each other's presence, we must not have a conversation about X or Y.
I hate
like
that so much.
We can't go there.
That's the dumbest part about growing up, you guys.
Yeah, it's like we can't go there with that topic because we are so convicted on opposite sides of this that it's going to ruin our relationship.
Right. Yeah.
And I think there's a certain line that people are inching back towards that Korra is saying, you pass that, you start getting into evil territory.
I think
you start getting into a territory of being capable of either following somebody like this or becoming someone like this.
Sure.
And I think what is a really important thing.
But you need convictions to fight against someone like that.
Absolutely,
too,
you do.
And to recognize it.
Absolutely, you do. I again point to my own fault of I tend to be somebody who is maybe less convicted than I should be, and a conversation like this points that out to me, and I go, what can I do about that?
Right.
That's what's important about having dialogues and debates of this kind. Is at the end of a debate, a good debate, I feel like you should come out of that going, good points. How do I incorporate that? Not to oh, you changed my whole life, my whole mind.
Yeah, I agree
I'm
with you now.
100% on
Yeah,
your
yeah.
side. I'm abandoning everything I believed in before.
Right.
That's just not going to happen, mostly, unless you are just totally like unhinged or something like that.
Yeah.
You're just being awakened to the fact that everything you believe is wrong, which is a very rare thing, if ever, to happen to a person. But I just think what's important about what the show gets across, in my opinion, is that villains are not people who look like Sauron and ring wraiths going around. They're wearing costumes that paint them out as, there they are, there's the bad guys.
Yeah.
They're not wearing the spiked armor and flames constantly like roaring behind them as they walk around. The villains are you and me.
Right.
Like we are very, very, very capable of doing things like that.
Right.
When we become so convinced we're right that we step beyond a certain boundary into, all right, no matter what happens, we have to make our ideal the world's ideal.
Gosh.
And by any means possible.
And you're right that that's evil, but also the whole world is made of people who did that.
Yes.
Everything, even our current society, every country, every state, everywhere that exists because people did that.
And that's why.
And was that bad? For every single country. Every group, every tribe.
Well, we don't have time to talk about that.
Okay.
But I think
I
you
have one
can.
other thing.
I think, but this is exactly leading into my point. You have a country like the United States, which founds itself on this principle of personal freedom,
Right.
and had slaves,
Right.
The slave, well, very much participated in the slave trade.
Immediate
that is absolutely
conflict, yeah.
of ideals that makes no sense, and that was heinously evil. So you cannot say.
And what about the people who are so convicted of the idea of freedom that they were willing to fight a war and kill millions of people in order to emancipate the slaves?
So that war, I think I would absolutely say yes, like that was a war that had to be fought.
Right.
And
I agree.
And had to be won.
160 years in hindsight, I agree.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing too, is it's very easy standing here in this position looking back and going, oh, how heinous, how awful.
Right.
Of course I would have been
How
on
could anyone
this side or that side.
I am the good guy.
But like, I of course, everyone wants to believe that they would have been on the right side of that particular conflict.
Or in Germany or anywhere. Oh, I'd be one of the good guys.
But look at the things you believe in now. I mean, really look at them and be like.
But only the wrong things.
Yeah, we'll try to find out which right things you believe that are wrong.
I know.
That's the challenge.
Yes. And everyone has to do it, and only 10% of people are actually capable of doing it. I think it's very difficult for a lot of people to actually engage in serious arguments, and some people just aren't capable. Like they are,
that's true.
Intelligence-wise, they are not capable of what would you call it? Like not original, but they're not capable of deep thinking about things. And it's like most of the country. And, like you can philosophize with the philosophers, but at some point, not everyone can do that, In fact, most people, I think, can't.
I wonder about that. I don't disagree with it necessarily.
What does George Carlin say? Imagine how stupid the average person is, and then realize that half of them are even stupider than that. I think about
George
that every now and then.
Carlin's fantastic.
Oh, he's hilarious.
And, his sort of like take or his pessimism about the world.
That's what I don't like
towards
about George.
the end of his career.
His pessimism,
is actually something I've felt very strongly in myself. Then I've tried to resist buying into
all the way. Yeah.
But I remember an interview where he basically said, so they asked him about like, your approach to comedy, like, what kind of perspective are you coming at this from? He's like, basically I'm rooting for the asteroid at this point. Right? He's like, that's the only way I can look at this and find humor in it. Otherwise I would just be so depressed and frustrated with the human race that it would break me. The only way that
that's Camus.
The only way that I can approach engaging with some of these topics that go into my comedy at all is to be this like outside observer, to take myself out of it.
Right.
And the strong feelings I have as being a part of this thing that I want to be better. I have to take myself out of it and comment on it as someone who's totally impartial and actually secretly wants an asteroid to hit the Earth and wipe it all out. And I tell you,
Hey,
I have had those thoughts before.
Sure.
So, and I don't like that I've had those thoughts. Right. I hate that I've had those thoughts. And that's totally an internal battle that I've had with myself. I'm like, no, come on, man. Like, pull it together.
Right, yeah.
But it is hard. It is hard to look at. So I say all of that to touch on what you said about most people aren't capable of it. I wonder...
Yeah.
And I guess the part about me that wants to not be asteroid rooter, impartial guy out here looking on, wants to at least ask the question, is it really that they're incapable, or is it that they are just so heavily discouraged? If we were to set up a society that encouraged free thinking and lost control for the elite, right?
Okay, because so we're in we educated fake fairyland here. Yeah.
We educated our people better. We encouraged thought.
We taught them how to think, not what to think.
Would it be true that people are incapable of deep thinking?
Right.
Or is it just that we have set up a system that encourages following strong, charismatic, convicted figures?
I think the former, and don't hate me. Well, yeah, that's all.
I don't know if I know or even like have a strong opinion on the answer, because one day I'll feel one way and one day I'll feel the other.
You know, I've been fighting this for so long. It's actually pretty recently that I've finally been like the abstract. Like I think I said this in one of the episodes of one of our shows. I can't remember which one, but I said that open-mindedness is a curse. That I have been cursed with an open mind. I've only thought of it as a curse like more recently.
Yeah.
Because I have lost all my convictions and I hate it. Like I really hate it. And I try to gain some of them back a little bit. You know.
And on that note, we'll see you guys.
Legend of Korra. I'll watch it again. I'll let you guys know how it goes.
Yeah, I liked it. I do think it fizzles in the end.
Yeah.
But overall, I would say the first 3 seasons I thought were very strong, and 4 was strong for like most of it, and then kind of fizzles a bit at the end. But I don't know. I was a fan.
There you have it.
And we will see you guys next week to talk about Xenosaga Pied Piper. Till then, have a great week. Peace out.